8 people sealed themselves inside a glass world in the Arizona desert. They had everything they needed to live forever: farmland, fresh water, a rainforest, even a small ocean with its own coral reef. The doors were locked from the inside, and the plan was simple: survive 2 years, completely cut off from the earth, breathing only the air their own world produced. Within 16 months, the air inside was killing them, and not one of them could figure out why. The oxygen was vanishing. It was leaving the sealed world, and there was no hole for it to leave through. This is the story of Biosphere 2, the most ambitious attempt humans ever made to build a second Earth, and what it accidentally revealed about the first one. The man behind it was named John Allen. He was not a typical scientist. He was an engineer, an adventurer, and the leader of a group that had spent years living together, building ships, running ranches, and dreaming about one enormous question: could human beings build a living world from scratch? Not a building, not a greenhouse, a complete, self-contained, breathing ecosystem that could sustain human life with nothing coming in and nothing going out. A planet in miniature, behind glass. For most of human history, the air, the water, the soil, and the millions of species that recycle them had been simply given. Nobody designed the system that keeps you alive. It was inherited, ancient, running quietly in the background of every life that has ever been lived. Allen wanted to know if humans understood that system well enough to build their own copy of it. If we could, it would mean we could one day live on Mars, repair a dying planet, or escape one. If we couldn't, it would mean something humbling about how little we actually understand the ground we stand on. With around $200 million from a Texas billionaire, Allen's team built it in the desert near Tucson. 3 acres under a vast lattice of glass and white steel, sealed more tightly than a space station. Inside, they constructed 5 different wild environments: a tropical rainforest, a million-liter ocean with a living coral reef, a mangrove wetland, a savanna, a fog desert. Below them, a farm to grow the crew's food, and machinery the size of a building to pump the rain and move the air. They filled it with around 3,000 species of plants and animals, chosen to form a working web of life. And on September 26, 1991, 8 people walked inside, waved at the cameras, and sealed the airlock behind them. For a while, it was paradise, exactly as designed. The crew farmed their land, tended the biomes, and ate what they grew. They were doctors, botanists, engineers, living inside the most complete artificial world ever made. The whole planet watched, and the whole planet assumed the hard part was over. The hard part hadn't started. The first thing to go was the food. The farm could not grow enough. The crew had planned for full bellies, but the crops came in smaller than expected, pests ate into the harvests, and the light through the glass was weaker than the open sky. Within months, all 8 people were constantly, gnawingly hungry. They lost weight steadily, some of them dropping 1/5 of their body mass. They were not starving to death, but they were always hungry, every hour of every day, and the constant hunger began to grind on them. Then the numbers on the oxygen monitors started to fall. The air you are breathing right now is about 21% oxygen. Inside Biosphere 2, that number began to slide, first to 19, then to 17. The crew started feeling it in their bodies. They were exhausted. Climbing a flight of stairs left them gasping. They couldn't finish sentences without stopping for breath. One crew member described feeling as though he was slowly suffocating, his mind going foggy, unable to think clearly. The oxygen kept dropping, past 16%, toward 14, the equivalent of living on a mountain peak. And here was the terrifying part. Oxygen does not simply disappear. It has to go somewhere. The world was sealed. Nothing was getting out. And yet, month after month, the air was emptying of the one thing the 8 people inside could not live without. And nobody on the team could explain where it was going. This is the moment the project stopped being a triumph and became a mystery. While the air thinned, the small sealed world was quietly tearing itself apart in other ways. The pollinators died first. The insects that fertilized the plants could not survive inside, and once they were gone, many plant species lost any way to reproduce. Of the 25 small animal species brought in to live alongside the crew, most went extinct inside the glass. But two kinds of creatures thrived beyond all control: ants and cockroaches. With their competitors gone, they multiplied into the empty spaces, swarming the kitchens, crawling over the farmland, inheriting the dying world. A fast-growing morning glory vine, brought in as a harmless ornamental, exploded across the rainforest and began strangling the trees, smothering everything it touched. The 8 humans were unraveling too. Trapped together, hungry, short of breath, under the eyes of the entire world, the crew split. They divided into 2 groups of 4, and the divide became so bitter that members of opposing factions would pass each other in the corridors of their tiny shared world and refuse to speak or even meet each other's eyes. They had volunteered to build a paradise together. Within a year, they could not stand the sight of one another. By January 1993, the oxygen had fallen so low that it was genuinely dangerous to the crew's health, and the team running the project from outside made a decision that broke the entire premise of the experiment. They pumped pure oxygen in from the outside world. The sealed planet had failed. It could not keep its own people breathing. The dream of a self-contained world ended with a truck full of oxygen tanks parked outside the glass. When it was over, the world delivered its verdict, and the verdict was simple. Biosphere 2 was a joke, a vanity project, a $200 million failure run by people playing God in the desert who couldn't even keep the air breathable. It became a punchline, a symbol of human arrogance, proof that we could never replace what nature does for free. That was the story everyone told, and it has been the story ever since. But that story misses the single most important thing the experiment discovered. Because the scientists did eventually solve the mystery of the vanishing oxygen, and the answer was not arrogance, or incompetence, or some obvious mistake. The answer was hiding in the walls. The structure of Biosphere 2 was built on an enormous amount of concrete, and fresh concrete, as it slowly hardens over years, absorbs carbon dioxide out of the air and locks it away inside itself, turning into stone. That much was understandable. But it created a hidden trap. The soil inside the biosphere had been made deliberately rich, packed with microbes to help the plants grow, and those microbes were breathing, consuming oxygen and producing carbon dioxide at a furious rate, far faster than anyone had predicted. In a normal ecosystem, plants would take that carbon dioxide and release the oxygen back. But here the carbon dioxide was being snatched out of the air by the curing concrete before the plants could use it, and locked permanently into the walls. The oxygen the plants would have released was never released. It was being quietly buried in the building itself, breath by breath, day after day, and no instrument had been watching the concrete because no one had ever thought the walls could breathe. This is the real lesson of Biosphere 2, and it is far stranger and more unsettling than arrogance. They did not fail because the idea was stupid. They failed because the system was more complicated than the smartest people, with the best funding, the best science, and $200 million were able to predict. A single overlooked detail, the chemistry of the concrete they stood on, was enough to nearly suffocate 8 people inside a world they had designed down to the last leaf. They had accounted for the rainforest and the ocean and the farm and the air. They had not accounted for the walls, and the walls nearly killed them. Now here is the part that should change how you feel sitting wherever you are right now. The experiment was called Biosphere 2 for a reason. The name implies a Biosphere 1, and Biosphere 1 is the Earth. The whole project was built as a tiny model of the planet you are living on this very second. The 8 people sealed in the glass were running a small, fast version of the exact situation every human being is in, trapped inside a single closed system, breathing air that something else produces, depending on a web of life so complicated that no one fully understands it, and assuming the whole time that someone, somewhere, has it under control. Inside the glass, the oxygen dropped, and nobody knew why until it was nearly too late. The pollinators vanished, and the plants began to fail. The invasive species took over the spaces the dying ones left behind, and the entire collapse was driven by interactions too tangled and too hidden for the people inside to see coming. Look at the planet around you, and ask whether any of that sounds familiar. We are the 8 people in the glass. The only difference is the size of the world, and the fact that we cannot pump in oxygen from somewhere outside, because for us, there is no outside. But the people who built Biosphere 2 did not see it as a failure, and neither should you. They saw it as the most valuable scientific result imaginable. For the first time, humans had tried to build a living world from scratch, and the attempt had revealed, in precise and humbling detail, exactly how much we did not know. Every plant that died, every percentage point of oxygen lost, every species that swarmed or vanished was data we had never had before about how a closed living system actually behaves. The crew came out thinner, exhausted, and barely speaking to each other, but they came out alive, carrying knowledge that no one before them had ever held. That is the thing worth holding on to. Biosphere 2 did not prove that humans are too arrogant to build a world. It proved that the world we already have is more intricate, more delicate, and more mysterious than we have ever been willing to admit. 8 people sealed themselves inside a perfect copy of the Earth to see if they understood how a planet keeps its people alive. The answer the glass gave back was no, not yet, not nearly. They learned it with an airlock they could open and a truck full of oxygen waiting outside. We are learning the same lesson now, on the only world we have, with the doors sealed and no truck coming. What we do with that answer is still being decided.